The broom handle was worn smooth from decades of use, and Helena Sutherland gripped it with calloused hands as she swept the porch of the dilapidated boarding house, watching the sun rise over what remained of Terlingua, Texas, in the early summer of 1887. She paused mid-stroke, her green eyes scanning the dusty main street where tumbleweeds gathered against abandoned storefronts, and spoke aloud to no one in particular, her voice carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for a woman of 32. "I used to own this entire town." The words hung in the dry morning air like a confession, and she did not realize anyone had heard them until a deep voice responded from behind her. "That's so." Helena turned sharply, her heart hammering against her ribs, to find a tall cowboy leaning against the porch post with his arms crossed over his chest. He was perhaps a few years older than her, with dark hair that brushed his collar beneath a worn Stetson, and eyes the color of creek water that studied her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. His clothes were dusty from travel, and a Colt revolver hung at his hip in a way that suggested he knew how to use it. "I did not hear you approach," she said, tightening her grip on the broom handle as if it might serve as a weapon. "Habit of mine, moving quiet," he said, pushing away from the post and removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Name is Cole Irving. Just rode in looking for a place to rest my horse and maybe get a hot meal. Sign out front says you rent rooms." Helena studied him for a long moment, trying to determine if he was trouble or just another drifter passing through. Terlingua had once been a thriving mining town, prosperous beyond measure when the mercury mines were producing, but that prosperity had died years ago, taking most of the population with it. Now only a handful of stubborn souls remained, and Helena among them, holding on to the last remnants of what had been. "I have rooms," she said finally, lowering the broom. $2 a night includes breakfast and supper, extra if you want a hot bath drawn." "Fair enough," Cole said, settling his hat back on his head. "You did not answer my question, though, about owning the town." Helena's jaw tightened, and she turned away from him to resume her sweeping, the bristles scraping against weathered wood. "That was a long time ago. Things change." "They do," Cole agreed, but he did not move from his spot. "But I am curious how a woman goes from owning a whole town to sweeping porches in what looks like its ghost." The audacity of the question should have angered her, but instead, Helena found herself laughing, a bitter sound that surprised even her. "My father was Helena Sutherland. He owned the largest mercury mine in all of Texas, along with most of the businesses in Terlingua. When he died 10 years ago, it all came to me, his only child. I was barely 22 and I thought I could hold it all together." She paused in her sweeping, staring out at the empty street. "I was wrong." Cole was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had softened. "What happened?" "Nathaniel Blackwell happened," Helena said, and the name tasted like poison on her tongue. "He was my father's business partner, or so we all thought. Turned out he had been forging documents for years, preparing to take everything the moment my father was not around to stop him. By the time I realized what was happening, he had lawyers and judges in his pocket, and I had nothing but debts I did not actually owe and claims I could not prove were false." "So he stole your inheritance," Cole said, and it was not a question. "He stole everything," Helena corrected. "The mine, the properties, even my family home. Left me with this boarding house only because it was in my mother's maiden name and he could not find the paperwork to take it to." She resumed sweeping with renewed vigor, as if she could sweep away the memories along with the dust. "That was 8 years ago. Most folks left when the mine operations changed hands and Blackwell started cutting wages and safety measures. Now he sits in my father's house like a king over a dying kingdom, and I sweep porches." Cole was silent for so long that Helena glanced back at him, wondering if he had lost interest in her sad tale. Instead, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something between sympathy and calculation. "Where is Blackwell now?" he asked. "Where he always is," Helena said, gesturing vaguely toward the far end of town where the larger houses sat on the hill overlooking everything else. "In the big house, counting his money and making sure nobody challenges his authority. He has men, rough types who make sure things stay the way he wants them." "How many men?" The question was asked casually, but something in Cole's tone made Helena pause. "Why do you want to know?" Cole shrugged, moving finally from his spot to lean against the porch railing, his gaze following hers toward the hill. "Just curious. Man who would steal a woman's birthright probably has enemies. Seems the type who would need protection." "He has 6 men who work for him directly," Helena said slowly. "Plus Sheriff Dawson, who might as well be on his payroll for all the law he enforces, and various others who owe him favors or money." She set the broom aside and crossed her arms over her chest, studying this stranger who asked dangerous questions. "Why do you really want to know, Mr. Irving?" Cole met her gaze steadily. "Maybe I am just a man who does not like hearing about injustice. Or maybe I am someone who knows a thing or two about taking back what was stolen." He smiled then, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "Or maybe I am just making conversation while I wait for you to show me to my room." Helena found herself wanting to trust him, this stranger with questions that echoed thoughts she had harbored for years but never dared voice aloud. But trust was a luxury she had learned to live without, so she simply nodded and picked up her broom. "Room 3, top of the stairs to the left. Water pump is out back. Supper is at 6. "Much obliged," Cole said, tipping his hat to her. "And Miss Sutherland, that breakfast you mentioned, I will be looking forward to it. I have a feeling we have a lot more to talk about." He disappeared into the boarding house, his boots heavy on the wooden stairs, and Helena stood alone on the porch wondering what she had just invited into her life. The morning sun was climbing higher now, promising another scorching day in the Chihuahuan desert that surrounded Terlingua like an ocean of rock and sand. She had survived 8 years of loss and humiliation, 8 years of watching the town her father built crumble into dust while the man who stole it all prospered. She had survived by keeping her head down and her thoughts to herself. But something about Cole Irving and the way he had asked his questions made her wonder if survival was enough anymore. She finished her sweeping and went inside to start preparing breakfast, her mind churning with possibilities she had long ago forced herself to stop considering. The boarding house kitchen was small but well maintained, one of the few things in her life she still had control over. She stoked the fire in the cast iron stove and set about making biscuits, frying bacon, and brewing strong coffee, losing herself in the familiar routine. By the time Cole came down the stairs, freshened up and with his hat in hand, the table was set and the food was ready. He was her only guest, as was usually the case these days. Travelers through Terlingua were rare, and those who did pass through rarely stayed long. "Smells wonderful," Cole said, taking a seat at the small table. "Been eating trail rations for near about 2 weeks. Real cooking is a blessing." "You have been traveling a long time then," Helena said, pouring coffee for both of them before sitting across from him. "Where from?" "Up north, mostly," Cole said, accepting the plate she passed him. "Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, wherever the work takes me." "What kind of work?" Cole took a bite of biscuit before answering, and Helena noticed he had good manners despite his rough appearance. "Various things. Hired my gun out a few times, worked cattle, did some prospecting." Lately, though, I have been helping folks with legal troubles, tracking down witnesses, finding documents, that sort of thing. Helena's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. You are a lawman. Not exactly, Cole said, meeting her gaze. More like someone who helps when the law will not or cannot. There are a lot of situations out here where the law is bought or broken, and regular folks need someone who knows how to navigate that. And what brings you to Terlingua? Cole was quiet for a moment, and Helena had the distinct impression he was weighing how much to tell her. Finally, he set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. Truth is, Miss Sutherland, I did not come here by accident. I heard about your situation from a lawyer in El Paso, a man named Thomas Wright. Said he had worked for your father once and felt terrible about what happened to you, but by the time he heard about Blackwell's schemes, the damage was done and you had disappeared. Helena's throat tightened. She remembered Thomas Wright, a kind man with honest eyes who had indeed worked with her father. Mr. Wright sent you. He mentioned your case to me about 6 months ago, said if I ever found myself in West Texas, I might look into it, see if there was anything that could be done. Cole picked up his coffee cup, studying her over the rim. So when I finished my last job in New Mexico, I decided to ride this way. Did some asking around in El Paso and Fort Davis, learned what I could about Nathaniel Blackwell and how he operates. And what did you learn? Helena asked, her heart beating faster now. That he is a snake who has done this before, Cole said bluntly. Wormed his way into partnerships with prosperous men, then used forgery and legal manipulation to steal their assets after they died or were no longer able to fight back. You were not his first victim, Miss Sutherland. There was a silver mine owner in Nevada and a ranch family in Arizona. Probably others I have not found yet. Helena felt her hands begin to shake, and she set down her coffee cup before she spilled it. So he is a professional thief. A careful one, Cole agreed. He covers his tracks well, pays the right people, and moves on before anyone can organize against him. But he made a mistake staying here in Terlingua. Got comfortable, I think, figured the town was dying anyway and nobody would ever challenge him. Nobody has, Helena pointed out, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. What makes you think anything can be done now, 8 years later? Cole leaned forward, his expression intense. Because theft does not have a statute of limitations when it comes to property fraud, and because I am good at finding evidence that people think they have hidden. But I need your help, Miss Sutherland. I need you to tell me everything you remember about your father's business dealings, about Blackwell, about the documents and claims. And I need you to be willing to fight, because this will not be easy or safe. Helena stared at him, at this stranger who had walked into her life asking dangerous questions and offering impossible hope. Every instinct she had developed over the past 8 years told her to refuse, to send him away before he stirred up trouble that would only make her situation worse. But there was something in his eyes, a determination and honesty that called to a part of her she thought had died along with her father. Why? She asked finally. Why do you care what happens to me or this town? Cole held her gaze for a long moment before answering. Because I have seen too many good people destroyed by men like Blackwell, and I got tired of watching it happen. Because someone should care. He paused, then added more softly. And because from what Thomas Wright told me, your father was a good man who treated his workers fairly and built this town into something to be proud of. That kind of legacy should not be stolen. Helena felt tears prick at her eyes, the first she had allowed herself in years. I do not have money to pay you. Did not ask for payment, Cole said. Just your help and your trust, however much of that you can spare. She should have said no. She should have protected herself from disappointment and danger. Instead, Helena found herself nodding, that spark of hope she had tried so hard to extinguish flaring back to life. Then yes, yes, I will help you. I will tell you everything I know. Good, Cole said, and his smile was warm and genuine. Then how about after we finish this excellent breakfast, you show me around what is left of Terlingua and tell me about how things used to be. I want to understand what we are trying to take back. They spent the rest of the morning walking through the ghost town, Helena pointing out buildings and telling stories that grew more animated as she remembered. Here was the general store her father had opened when the first miners arrived. There was the schoolhouse, where she had learned to read and write alongside the children of workers. The church at the end of the street, now with broken windows and a sagging roof, had been filled every Sunday with voices singing hymns. Cole listened carefully, asking occasional questions, and Helena found herself opening up in a way she had not in years. There was something about him that made her feel safe, made her want to trust, despite all her hard-learned caution. They walked all the way to the mine entrance, now closed with a heavy gate and warning signs, and Helena told him about the mercury extraction process, about the men who had worked there, about the prosperity that had flowed through the town like water. My father used to say that wealth was not just about money, she said as they stood looking at the locked gate. It was about what you built with it, the lives you improved, the community you created. He paid fair wages, insisted on safety measures, and put profits back into Terlingua. That is why people loved him, why they stayed even when other mines offered more money. They knew he cared. And Blackwell does not care, Cole observed. Blackwell only cares about squeezing every ounce of profit he can before moving on to the next opportunity, Helena said. When he took over, he cut wages, eliminated safety inspections, and raised prices at the company store. Men started dying in accidents that could have been prevented. Families left because they could not afford to live here anymore. The town died because he killed it. Cole walked up to the gate, examining the lock with the careful attention of someone who understood such things. Does he still run the mine? Barely, Helena said. Production dropped off years ago. Most of the easy mercury has been extracted. He keeps a skeleton crew going, maybe 20 men now instead of the 200 my father employed. Makes just enough to maintain his lifestyle and pay his thugs. So his hold on power is not as strong as it might seem, Cole mused. Perhaps not, Helena agreed. But those 20 men depend on him for their survival, and his hired guns are loyal because he pays them well. And the people who might have stood with me 8 years ago are long gone. Cole turned away from the gate to look at her, his expression thoughtful. You know what I think, Miss Sutherland. I think you are stronger than you believe. You survived 8 years of loss and humiliation, kept your dignity and your boarding house, and did not let bitterness destroy you. That takes a kind of strength most people do not have. Helena felt heat rise to her cheeks, unused to such direct praise. I did what I had to do to survive. Survival is not the same as surrender, Cole said. You kept going. That matters. They walked back toward the boarding house in companionable silence, and Helena found herself acutely aware of Cole's presence beside her, the easy way he moved, the respectful distance he maintained. It had been a long time since she had felt anything like attraction, had allowed herself to see a man as anything other than a potential threat or disappointment. But there was something about Cole Irving that stirred feelings she thought she had buried. Back at the boarding house, they sat on the porch in the shade, and Helena began to tell him the details he needed to know. She described the documents her father had kept, the ledgers and deeds and contracts, and where they had been stored. She explained how Blackwell had claimed many of those documents were actually his, forged with signatures that looked convincingly like her father's hand. She detailed the court proceedings that had stripped her of her inheritance, the lawyers who had seemed more interested in pleasing Blackwell than seeking justice. Cole took notes in a small leather journal, asking clarifying questions, and Helena marveled at how seriously he took her words. For so long, no one had believed her or cared about her story. Having someone finally listen, really listen, felt like water after years of thirst. The biggest problem, Helena said as the sun climbed toward noon, is that the original documents are gone. Blackwell claimed they were destroyed in a fire at the mine office 7 years ago, conveniently right after the last court case. Without those originals, I have no way to prove the documents he used were forgeries. Unless the originals were not actually destroyed, Cole said, looking up from his journal. What do you mean? Men like Blackwell are paranoid, Cole explained. They keep insurance, leverage against the people they have wronged in case those people ever find a way to fight back. I would bet good money your father's original documents still exist somewhere, probably locked away in Blackwell's house. Helena's heart skipped. You think you can find them? I think I can try, Cole said, but we need to be smart about this. We need to learn Blackwell's routines, figure out when the house is vulnerable, and find out where he might keep important documents. We also need to start gathering allies, people in Terlingua who might still remember your father and would be willing to stand with us when the time comes. There are not many left, Helena warned. Then we work with what we have, Cole said simply. David beat Goliath with a sling and a stone, after all. Helena laughed despite herself. Are you David in this story? We both are, Cole said, and the way he said it, including her as an equal partner, made something warm bloom in Helena's chest. They spent the afternoon planning, and Helena felt more alive than she had in years. When evening came and she prepared supper, Cole helped her in the kitchen, an easy partnership forming between them as they worked. He told her stories about his travels, about the places he had seen and the people he had helped, and Helena found herself laughing at his dry humor and sharp observations. Why do you really do this? She asked as they ate together at the small table, the lamp casting warm light around them. Helping people like me, there has to be easier ways to make a living. Cole was quiet for a moment, his fork pausing over his plate. My father was a good man, a lot like yours from what you have described. He ran a freight business in Kansas, honest and hardworking. When I was 15, a man named Richard Carlisle used legal tricks and violence to force my father out of business. Claimed debts that did not exist, had my father beaten when he tried to fight back. My father lost everything, including his will to live. He died 6 months later, I think from a broken heart as much as anything. I am sorry, Helena said softly. My mother and I survived, but barely, Cole continued. I spent years angry, wanting revenge, but not knowing how to get it. Eventually, I learned to channel that anger into helping others facing similar situations. I cannot bring my father back, but I can stop men like Carlisle and Blackwell from destroying other good people. Helena reached across the table, placing her hand over his. Your father would be proud of the man you became. Cole turned his hand over to clasp hers, and the contact sent electricity through Helena's body. I hope so. Just like I hope we can make your father proud by taking back what is rightfully yours. They held hands for a long moment, and Helena saw her own feelings reflected in Cole's eyes. This connection between them was real, growing stronger with every passing hour. It terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The next few days fell into a pattern. Cole spent his days carefully observing Terlingua, noting who came and went, tracking Blackwell's movements and those of his men. He was patient and methodical, and Helena began to understand why he was good at what he did. In the evenings, they would sit together and share what they had learned, their conversations growing more personal as they learned about each other. Helena told him about her childhood, about riding through the desert with her father, learning the mining business from him, dreaming of the day she would help him run his empire. She told him about her mother, who had died when Helena was 12, and how that loss had brought father and daughter even closer together. She spoke of the grief and confusion after her father's death, of feeling completely alone in the world while Blackwell systematically destroyed everything she loved. Cole shared his own stories, painting pictures of a life spent wandering, of friends made and lost, of narrow escapes and hard-won victories. He spoke of loneliness, of never having a place to truly call home since leaving Kansas, of wondering sometimes what it might be like to settle down instead of always moving to the next fight. On the fourth evening, as they sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, Cole said quietly, "I met with some of the miners today, the ones still working for Blackwell." Helena turned to him, surprised. "How did you manage that?" "Carefully," Cole said with a slight smile. "Bought them drinks at what passes for a saloon, said I was considering applying for work. Got them talking about conditions, pay, safety. It is as bad as you described, maybe worse. 3 men have died in accidents in the past year alone, and Blackwell paid their families nothing." "They will not stand against him," Helena said. "They need those jobs." "Not all of them," Cole said. "There is a man named Miguel Rodriguez been working that mine for 20 years. He remembers your father, says Helena Sutherland saved his life once when there was a tunnel collapse. He was there the day of the fire that supposedly destroyed all the documents." Helena sat up straighter. "What did he see?" "He says there was a fire in the office, small one, but the documents had been removed before it started. He saw Blackwell's men carrying crates out the day before, loading them onto a wagon. He never saw them come back." "So the fire was staged," Helena said, excitement building in her chest. "Looks that way," Cole agreed. "Miguel would be willing to testify to that if we can get a fair hearing. He is tired of working for Blackwell, tired of seeing men die for no reason. He says there are others who feel the same, but they are afraid." "They have every right to be afraid," Helena said. "Blackwell's men are dangerous." "They are," Cole acknowledged. "Which is why we need to be smarter than them. I have been watching the big house. Blackwell leaves every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, rides out to the mine to check on operations, usually gone for 3 or 4 hours. His hired men rotate in shifts, but there is typically only one watching the house during those times." Helena understood what he was suggesting. "You want to break in?" "I want to find those documents," Cole corrected. "And yes, that will require getting into the house. But I will not ask you to be part of that. It is too dangerous." "That is my father's house," Helena said firmly. "My house by rights. I know every room, every hiding place. You need me." Cole looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with the desire to protect her and the knowledge that she was right. "If anything happened to you," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, "I would never forgive myself." The confession hung between them, heavy with meaning. Helena reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Then we make sure nothing happens to either of us. We do this together or not at all." "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met," Cole said, but there was admiration in his voice. "I had a good teacher," Helena said. "My father always said that backing down from what was right was the same as surrender." Cole squeezed her hand. "Then we do this together. Tuesday afternoon, 3 days from now. We will need to plan carefully, account for everything that could go wrong. They spent those 3 days preparing. Cole mapped out the house from his observations and Helena's descriptions, identifying the most likely places Blackwell might hide important documents. They planned their approach, their escape route, what they would do if they were discovered. Helena felt fear churning in her stomach, but also exhilaration. After 8 years of helplessness, she was finally fighting back. On Monday evening, as they reviewed the plan one final time, Cole said, "I need you to promise me something. If things go wrong tomorrow, if we are discovered and I tell you to run, you run. Do not look back, do not try to help me, just get to safety." "Cole, I cannot just leave you," Helena protested. "You can and you will," Cole said, his tone brooking no argument. "Because if both of us are caught, Blackwell wins. If you get away, there is still a chance to expose him to get justice. Promise me, Helena." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips made her heart ache. "I promise," she said, even though she knew it was a lie. She could no more abandon Cole than she could stop breathing. That night, Helena lay awake in her bed, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling around her. Down the hall, she knew Cole was probably also awake, also thinking about tomorrow. She thought about how much her life had changed in less than a week, how this stranger had walked into her world and given her back something she thought she had lost forever: hope. But it was more than hope. When she was honest with herself, she knew what she felt for Cole Irving went deeper than gratitude or partnership. She had fallen in love with him, with his quiet strength and his fierce sense of justice, with the way he listened to her and treated her as an equal. It was foolish, perhaps, to fall so hard and so fast, but the heart followed its own rules. She must have eventually drifted to sleep because she woke to early morning light and the smell of coffee brewing. Cole was already up, moving quietly around the kitchen. When she came downstairs, he looked at her and smiled, and for a moment they simply stood there, acknowledging everything they could not say. "Nervous?" he asked, handing her a cup of coffee. "Terrified," Helena admitted, "but also ready." Tuesday morning passed slowly. They went about their normal routines, not wanting to draw attention. Cole took his horse to the stable for grooming, visible and ordinary. Helena hung laundry and swept, just another unremarkable day. But underneath the normalcy, her pulse hammered and her senses felt heightened, aware of every detail. At noon, they saw Blackwell ride down the hill toward the mine, accompanied by 2 of his men. Cole had a third man already under watch, confirming that only 1 guard remained at the house. They waited another 30 minutes to be sure, then made their move. The walk up the hill felt eternal, and Helena's legs trembled with each step. This house had been her home, the place where she had grown up and felt safe. Seeing it now, knowing a thief lived within its walls, made her sick with anger and grief. They approached from the back, using the cover of outbuildings and untended gardens. The guard was stationed at the front, visible through the windows, reading a newspaper and looking bored. Cole picked the lock on the back door with quick efficiency, and then they were inside. The familiar smells hit Helena like a wave: wood, polish and leather, pipe tobacco and ink. Her father's smells, now violated by Blackwell's presence. She steadied herself against Cole's arm, taking a moment to breathe. "Where?" Cole whispered. Helena led him through the kitchen, down the hallway she had run through as a child. Everything was the same but different, her family's furniture mixed with Blackwell's gaudy additions. They climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, their footsteps silent on the runner carpet. Helena's heart was in her throat as they approached what had been her father's study. The door was locked, but Cole made quick work of it. Inside, the study was much as Helena remembered, except her father's personal items had been replaced with Blackwell's. She moved to the massive desk, running her hands over what her father had touched thousands of times. "He kept important documents in a safe," she whispered. "Behind the bookshelf, hidden panel." They found the panel easily enough, but the safe behind it required a combination. Cole examined it carefully, pressing his ear against the metal as he slowly turned the dial. Minutes ticked by like hours, and Helena kept glancing toward the door, expecting discovery at any moment. Finally, she heard a soft click and watched as Cole swung the safe door open. Inside were stacks of papers, ledgers, and several metal document boxes. Cole began carefully removing items, examining them quickly. Helena watched over his shoulder, and then she saw it her father's handwriting on a deed, the real deed to the main mine. Her hands shook as she held the document, seeing her father's signature, authentic and unmistakable. "This is it," she breathed. "This proves everything." "Keep looking," Cole said. "We need all of it." They found more of the original partnership agreements showing that Blackwell had only a minor stake. The accounting ledgers in her father's hand that contradicted the forgeries Blackwell had presented in court. Even a letter from Blackwell to an associate discussing the plan to forge documents after Helena Sutherland's death. It was all here, a complete record of the theft. Cole was loading documents into a leather satchel when they heard voices downstairs. Both froze, Helena's blood turning to ice. The guard was talking to someone, and that someone had a voice she recognized: Nathaniel Blackwell himself. "He came back early," Helena whispered, panic rising in her throat. Cole grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the door. They could hear footsteps on the stairs now, Blackwell's voice calling for his guard. There was no time to close the safe, no way to hide what they had done. They ran down the hallway toward the back stairs, the servants' entrance her mother had used. Behind them, she heard Blackwell's shout of rage as he discovered the open safe. They burst out the back door and ran for the cover of the outbuildings. Helena's skirts tangled around her legs, slowing her down. She heard shots fired, men shouting, boots pounding on the ground behind them. Cole pulled her around the corner of a shed, pressing them both flat against the wall as two of Blackwell's men ran past their hiding spot. "We need to get to town," Cole whispered urgently. "Find Miguel and get these documents somewhere safe." They moved quickly but carefully, using every bit of cover available. More shots rang out, and Helena felt a bullet whiz past her head close enough to hear it sing. Terror gave her speed she did not know she possessed. They were running down the hill now, heading for the boarding house for safety, for anything that might help them survive. They were halfway there when a man stepped out in front of them, rifle raised. Helena recognized him as Jake Carson, one of Blackwell's most vicious enforcers. "Well now," Jake said with an ugly grin. "Looks like we caught ourselves some thieves." Cole moved faster than Helena could track, drawing his revolver and firing in one smooth motion. Jake went down with a cry, clutching his leg. Cole grabbed Helena's hand again and they ran, but she knew it was only a matter of time before they were surrounded. Blackwell had more men, and they were converging from all directions. They burst through the door of the boarding house and Cole slammed it shut, throwing the bolt. "Upstairs," he ordered Helena, pressing the satchel of documents into her hands. "Hide these. If they take me, you run. You hear me? You take these documents and you run." "I will not leave you," Helena said fiercely. "You promised," Cole reminded her, his eyes intense. "Please, Helena, this is bigger than both of us. Those documents are the only chance for justice." Before she could respond, the front door shuddered under heavy blows. Men were shouting outside, demanding they come out. Helena ran upstairs, her mind racing. She needed to hide the documents somewhere they would not be found, somewhere she could retrieve them later. She went to her bedroom and pried up a loose floorboard, stuffing the satchel into the space beneath. Then she grabbed her father's old revolver from her bedside table and ran back downstairs. Cole was at the window, his gun drawn, watching the men surrounding the building. "I told you to hide," he said without looking at her. "And I told you I will not leave you," Helena said, checking the chamber of her revolver to make sure it was loaded. "We fight together or not at all." Cole looked at her then, and something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it is too soon and probably insane, but I need you to know that. Whatever happens next, I love you." Helena's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too. And we are not dying today, do you understand me? We are going to get through this." The front door splintered under a final blow, crashing inward. Men poured through, led by Blackwell himself. He was a tall man in his mid-50s, with graying hair and cold eyes that had haunted Helena's nightmares for years. He looked at her with an expression of amused contempt. "Little Helena Sutherland," he said, his voice smooth and mocking. "After all these years of keeping your head down, you finally grew a spine. Pity it will get you killed." "You stole everything from me," Helena said, her voice steady despite her fear. She kept her revolver pointed at him. "My father's legacy, my birthright, my life, but I know the truth now and I have proof." Blackwell's expression flickered just for a moment. "What proof? You have nothing." "We have the original documents from your safe," Cole said. "Every forged paper, every false claim. Your whole scheme laid bare." "Where are they?" Blackwell demanded, his composure cracking. "That safe was locked." "Safe locks can be opened," Cole said with a slight smile, "by people who know what they are doing." Blackwell's face darkened with rage. He gestured to his men. "Search this place. Tear it apart board by board if you have to. Find those documents." "You cannot keep doing this," Helena said desperately. "You cannot just steal and kill and expect no consequences. Those documents are already on their way to a federal marshal. Even if you find them here, copies exist." "You have lost, Blackwell." It was a lie, a desperate bluff, but Helena sold it with every ounce of conviction she possessed. She saw doubt flicker in Blackwell's eyes, saw him weighing possibilities. His men were starting to move through the house, searching, but they were also listening. Seeds of uncertainty had been planted. "You are lying," Blackwell said, but his voice lacked confidence. "Am I?" Cole challenged. "You think we would be stupid enough to break into your house without insurance? We have been planning this for days." The moment we got those documents, copies went to 3 different locations, including federal authorities in El Paso. By tomorrow, every newspaper in Texas will know what you did. It was a beautiful bluff, and Helena watched as fear began to replace anger in Blackwell's expression. He was a man who operated in shadows, who relied on controlling information. The thought that his crimes might become public knowledge clearly terrified him. "Kill them," he ordered his men suddenly. "Kill them both and burn this place down. We find those documents and destroy everything." The men raised their weapons, and Helena knew they were out of time for talking. But before anyone could fire, the front door crashed open again, and Miguel Rodriguez stood there with a dozen other miners, all armed and looking grimly determined. "Drop your weapons," Miguel said, his rifle pointed at Blackwell. "All of you. This ends now." The standoff was tense, guns pointed in every direction. Blackwell's men were outnumbered but more experienced fighters. Helena could see them calculating odds, deciding whether to fight or surrender. The moment stretched out, knife-edge thin. Then Sheriff Dawson walked in, his hand on his gun, and Helena's heart sank. Dawson was Blackwell's man, had been for years. But instead of pointing his weapon at Miguel and the miners, he pointed it at Blackwell. "I said this ends now," the sheriff said quietly. "I have looked the other way for years, Nathaniel, because you paid me to and because I was a coward. But I will not be part of murder. These men are right. It ends now." Blackwell stared at his bought sheriff with disbelief and fury. "You are making a mistake, Dawson. Think about what you are throwing away." "I am thinking about being able to look at myself in the mirror," Dawson replied. "I am thinking about Harrison Sutherland, who was 10 times the man you could ever be, and what he would say if he could see what I have become." He looked at Helena. "I am sorry, miss. I am sorry for failing you and your father." Helena felt tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal. "Help us now," she said. "That is all the apology I need." What followed was chaos of a different kind. Blackwell's men were disarmed and taken into custody. Miguel and the other miners, it turned out, had been listening outside the boarding house, had heard everything that was said. When they realized Blackwell was planning to commit murder, they had decided enough was enough. Years of fear and resentment had finally overcome caution. Helena retrieved the documents from their hiding place, and as the sun set over Terlingua, she and Cole sat with Sheriff Dawson and Miguel, laying out the evidence of Blackwell's crimes. It was overwhelming and damning, impossible to deny. By morning, Dawson had sent word to the federal marshal's office in El Paso. By the end of the week, federal authorities had arrived to take Blackwell and his men into custody. The legal proceedings that followed took months, but with the original documents in hand and multiple witnesses willing to testify, the outcome was never in doubt. Blackwell's forgeries were exposed, his schemes laid bare in court. Helena's ownership of her father's properties was restored, along with 8 years of lost profits that Blackwell was ordered to repay from his seized assets. Through it all, Cole remained at her side. He testified in court, helped her navigate the legal complexities, and slowly, carefully, they began the work of rebuilding not just Helena's inheritance, but also the town itself. The mine needed repairs and safety upgrades before it could fully reopen. Buildings that had been abandoned needed restoration. Families who had left needed reasons to return. It was overwhelming work, but Helena discovered she was not alone. Miguel became her mine foreman, implementing the safety measures her father would have insisted on. Other former workers began to drift back, drawn by news that Terlingua was returning to the kind of town Harrison Sutherland had envisioned. Sheriff Dawson, trying to make amends for his years of corruption, worked tirelessly to restore law and order, and through everything, there was Cole. He had planned to move on after the legal matters were settled, to find the next person who needed help, but Helena asked him to stay. On a warm evening 6 months after Blackwell's arrest, as they stood together looking out over a town that was finally beginning to revive, she turned to him and said, "I need you to stay, not just because you are useful or because you helped me, but because I love you and I cannot imagine building this future without you in it." Cole pulled her close, kissing her with a passion that made her dizzy. "I was hoping you would say that," he murmured against her lips. "Because I stopped thinking of myself as a drifter about the same time I started thinking of you as my home." They were married in the restored church 3 months later, with the whole town in attendance. It was a celebration not just of their love but of Terlingua's rebirth. Helena wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved all these years, and Cole wore a new suit that made him look almost uncomfortable in its formality. But his eyes, when he looked at her, held nothing but joy and certainty. Miguel gave Helena away, standing in for the father she still missed every day. Sheriff Dawson attended with his head held high, having finally earned back some measure of respect through his work to make things right. Even Thomas Wright, the lawyer from El Paso who had inadvertently set everything in motion, traveled to Terlingua to witness the wedding and see what his faith in Cole Irving had accomplished. The year after their marriage was busy beyond measure. Helena and Cole worked together to manage the mine and the other businesses, implementing fair wages and safe conditions, just as Helena Sutherland had done. Production increased as workers returned, drawn by the promise of honest employment. The town's population grew from a handful of stubborn holdouts to over 300 people. New businesses opened: a proper general store, a restaurant, a school where children's laughter once again filled the air. Helena discovered she had her father's gift for business and her mother's gift for community building. She knew every family in Terlingua by name, attended every birth and funeral, made sure that prosperity was shared by all who contributed to it. But it was Cole's steady presence beside her that made everything possible. He managed security and logistics, dealt with the rough elements that inevitably came with a mining town, and provided the kind of stable partnership that allowed Helena to flourish. On their first anniversary, as they sat together on the porch of the boarding house that Helena insisted on keeping as their home despite now owning the large house on the hill, Cole said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not decided to ride into Terlingua that day?" Helena leaned her head against his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "I try not to think about it. That life, the one where I spent my days just surviving, sweeping porches and accepting defeat, that woman feels like a stranger to me now." "She was not a stranger," Cole said gently. "She was you being strong in the only way you knew how, but I am glad I got to help you find another way to be strong." "We helped each other," Helena corrected. "You gave me back my birthright, but I gave you something too, a home, a place to belong." Cole kissed the top of her head. "You gave me everything." The seasons turned and Terlingua continued to grow. 2 years after their marriage, Helena gave birth to their first child, a son they named Harrison Cole Irving after both their fathers. The birth was difficult, and there were hours when Cole paced outside their bedroom like a caged animal, terrified of losing her. But Helena was strong, and when he finally held his son in his arms, tears streaming down his face, he thanked God for the family he never thought he would have. Little Harry, as they called him, became the darling of Terlingua. He was doted on by Miguel and his wife Rosa, by Sheriff Dawson, who proved to be a surprisingly gentle grandfather figure, by every miner and merchant and family in town. As he grew from baby to toddler, his laughter became one of the everyday sounds of the regenerated town, along with the stamp mill at the mine and the church bells on Sunday. When Harry was 3, Helena gave birth to twin girls, Caroline and Grace, who inherited their mother's green eyes and their father's dark hair. The boarding house, spacious as it was, began to feel crowded with 3 active children, but Helena and Cole would not consider moving to the big house on the hill. "This is where we fell in love," Helena insisted. "This is where our real life began. I will not abandon it for something grander." So instead, they expanded, adding rooms and modernizing the kitchen, creating a home that was comfortable and filled with love. The boarding house still took in occasional guests, though now it was managed by a woman Helena employed while she focused on her growing family and the businesses that supported the town. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, Helena and Cole would sit together and talk about the future. The mine would not last forever, they both knew that. Eventually, the mercury would run out and Terlingua would need to find new reasons to exist. But they were already planning for that, encouraging diversification, bringing in cattle ranching and trading opportunities, making sure the town's prosperity was not dependent on a single resource. "We are building something that will outlast us," Cole said one night, his arm around Helena as they watched the stars from their porch. "A real legacy like your father wanted." "Our legacy," Helena corrected, "and our children's legacy." Harrison Cole, Caroline, and Grace Irving will inherit a town that was built on justice and hard work, not on theft and cruelty. That matters. "It does," Cole agreed. "Your father would be proud of you, Helena, of everything you have accomplished." "We accomplished," she said again, because it was important to her that he understood. "I could not have done any of this without you. You gave me back more than my inheritance. You gave me back myself." As the years passed, their love only deepened. They had their challenges. Certainly running a mining town was never easy, and there were disputes to settle, accidents to manage, lean years when production dropped and everyone worried. But they faced everything together, their partnership unshakable. The people of Terlingua looked to them as leaders, yes, but also as an example of what marriage and commitment could be. When Harry was 10 and the twins were 7, tragedy struck when a tunnel collapse at the mine killed 2 workers despite all the safety measures in place. Helena was devastated, feeling as though she had failed in her duty to keep the miners safe. She attended the funerals and made sure the families were provided for, but the weight of responsibility crushed her. It was Cole who sat with her night after night, reminding her that she was not God, that accidents happened despite best efforts, that what mattered was how she responded to tragedy. "Your father would not want you to torture yourself," he told her gently. "He would want you to honor those men by continuing to make Terlingua a place worth living and working, by being better tomorrow than you were today." Helena took his words to heart and used the tragedy as motivation to implement even more rigorous safety protocols. She brought in outside experts to inspect the mine, invested in new equipment and training, and she never forgot the names of the men who had died, visiting their graves regularly and making sure their children had opportunities for education and advancement. The children grew, as children do. Harry proved to have his mother's head for business and his father's sense of justice, often settling disputes among his schoolmates with a fairness that made his parents proud. Caroline was wild and adventurous, always climbing trees and exploring the desert, while Grace was quieter, bookish, spending hours in the town's small library reading everything she could find. When Harry turned 16, he asked to work at the mine during summer break, wanting to understand the business that would someday be his responsibility. Cole took him in hand, teaching him not just about mining but about leadership, about treating workers with respect, about the difference between authority and power. Helena watched her son transform from boy to young man, and felt a bittersweet mixture of pride and nostalgia for the baby she had held in her arms. The twins at 13 were inseparable despite their different personalities, and Helena often found herself thinking how lucky they were to have each other, to grow up in a town that was safe and prosperous, to never know the kind of loss and betrayal she had experienced. But she also made sure they knew their family's history, that they understood the town had not always been this way, that everything they enjoyed had been hard-won and needed to be protected. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Cole surprised Helena by arranging for the entire town to celebrate with them. There was a dance in the town square, food and music and laughter filling the air. As Helena and Cole took to the dance floor for the first waltz, she looked around at the faces surrounding them, friends and neighbors, children and grandparents, the living community her father had dreamed of and she and Cole had rebuilt. "What are you thinking?" Cole asked, spinning her gently to the music. That I am the luckiest woman alive, Helena said honestly. 20 years ago I was alone and hopeless, convinced my life was over. And now I have you and our children and this town full of people I love. It feels like a miracle. Not a miracle, Cole said, pulling her closer. Just two people who refused to give up, who chose to fight for what was right. You are the one who made all of this possible, Helena. Your strength, your determination, your faith that things could be better. Our strength, Helena insisted once more, because after 20 years he should know better than to leave himself out of the equation. Everything we have, we built together. As they danced under the stars, surrounded by the town they had saved and rebuilt, Helena thought about that morning so long ago when she had stood on her porch sweeping and said aloud, "I used to own this entire town." She had not known then that a cowboy was listening, that he would change everything, that together they would take it all back and transform it into something better than it had been before. She thought about her father, and how she hoped he could see what had become of his legacy. She thought about the scared, defeated woman she had been, and marveled at the transformation love and purpose could work in a human soul. Most of all, she thought about Cole, her partner in love, the man who had given her back not just her inheritance but her future. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. Harry eventually married a lovely young woman named Elizabeth who had moved to Terlingua to teach at the school, and they gave Helena and Cole their first grandchildren. Caroline, true to her adventurous nature, married a cattleman and moved to a ranch outside town, though she visited often and remained close to her family. Grace took over management of the town's library and cultural programs, bringing theater and music to Terlingua, and enriching the community in ways that had nothing to do with Mercury or money. The mine, as Helena and Cole had known it would, eventually played out. By the time Helena was in her mid-50s, production had dropped to levels that no longer justified the operation. It was a bittersweet day when they made the decision to close it officially, though they had been preparing the town for this transition for years. Terlingua by then had diversified enough that the closure, while significant, did not spell disaster. The cattle ranching had grown into a substantial operation, and the town had become a waypoint for travelers moving between larger cities, with trading and services providing solid income. Cole, now in his late 50s with silver threading through his dark hair, remained as steady and strong as ever. He and Helena were known throughout West Texas as the couple who had fought corruption and won, who had built a model community in the harsh desert landscape. Their story had become legend, told and retold until it sometimes seemed larger than life. But to Helena, the story had always been simple. It was about a woman who had lost everything and a man who had helped her find the strength to take it back. It was about love growing in unexpected places, about partnership and faith and refusing to accept injustice. It was about building something good from the ruins of tragedy. On their 30th anniversary, Helena and Cole took a quiet evening away from the celebrations to ride out into the desert together. Just the two of them and the vast landscape that had been the backdrop to their entire life together. They found a spot overlooking Terlingua, the town spread out below them with lights beginning to twinkle as evening fell. "You have any regrets?" Helena asked, leaning back against Cole's chest as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Not a single one," Cole said without hesitation. "Best decision I ever made was riding into Terlingua 30 years ago. Best thing I ever did was fall in love with a woman who was sweeping her porch and talking about the town she used to own." Helena laughed, remembering that moment with perfect clarity. "I must have sounded so pathetic." "You sounded determined," Cole corrected. You sounded like someone who had not given up, not really. You were just waiting for a reason to fight back. And you gave me that reason, Helena said. You believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. We saved each other, Cole said, and after 30 years, Helena had finally learned to accept that truth without argument. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first conversations, their first kiss, every triumph and tragedy of their shared life. The future stretched before them still, years of grandchildren to spoil and businesses to guide and a community to nurture. But in that moment, Helena felt perfectly content, held safe in the arms of the man she loved, overlooking the town that was both her birthright and her greatest achievement. I love you, she said, as she had said countless times over 30 years but never tired of saying. Today, tomorrow, always. Always, Cole agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple, until the end of time and beyond. As they rode back to town together under the stars, Helena thought about how her father used to say that the true measure of a life well lived was not in wealth accumulated, but in lives touched, in good done, in love shared. By that measure, she and Cole had lived extraordinarily well. They had taken a dying town and brought it back to life. They had raised children who carried on their values. They had loved each other fiercely and faithfully through 3 decades of joy and struggle. Terlingua itself stood as their monument, a place where fairness and community mattered more than profit, where people could build good lives for themselves and their families. It would outlast them both, this town that Helena had once lost and fought to reclaim, and future generations would benefit from the foundation she and Cole had laid. That night, lying in bed with Cole's arm around her and the familiar sounds of the boarding house settling around them, Helena felt a deep and abiding peace. She had come so far from the lonely, defeated woman sweeping her porch and mourning her losses. She had found love, purpose, family, and home. She had taken back everything that was stolen and built it into something better than it had been before. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, not sure if she was speaking to Cole, to God, to her father's memory, or to all of them at once. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." Cole's arm tightened around her. "Thank you for letting me be part of it." They drifted to sleep together, as they had for 30 years, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a love story for the ages in the wild and unforgiving landscape of West Texas. Outside, Terlingua slept peacefully under the stars, a testament to the truth that sometimes the things we lose can be reclaimed, that justice can prevail over corruption, and that love, when it comes, has the power to transform everything. The years that followed their 30th anniversary were golden ones, mellowed by age and sweetened by the satisfaction of work well done. Helena and Cole gradually passed more responsibility to their children and trusted managers, though they never fully retired. Helena remained involved in town decisions until the day she died at the age of 78, peacefully in her sleep with Cole beside her. Her funeral was attended by over 500 people, many who had traveled from across Texas to pay respects to the woman who had become a legend in her own lifetime. Cole, devastated by her loss but sustained by their children and grandchildren, lived another 3 years, and those who knew him said he spent those years telling stories about Helena and making sure everyone knew that everything good in his life had started the day he rode into Terlingua and heard a woman say she used to own the entire town. When Cole died at 83, they buried him beside Helena on the hill overlooking Terlingua with headstones that bore simple inscriptions. Helena's read, "Beloved wife, mother, and friend, she fought for justice and won." Cole's read, "Beloved husband, father, and friend." He helped her take it all back. Their children and grandchildren continued to live in Terlingua, carrying on the family business and maintaining the values Helena and Cole had instilled. The town prospered into the 20th century, adapting and evolving but never losing sight of the principles that had guided its rebirth. Harry became mayor and served for over 20 years, bringing his parents' same commitment to fairness and community. Caroline's ranch grew into one of the largest in West Texas. Grace turned the library into a cultural center that attracted visitors from across the region. And always, the story was told and retold how Helena Sutherland had lost everything, how a cowboy named Cole Irving had helped her reclaim it, and how their love had transformed not just their own lives but an entire town. It became a part of Terlingua's identity, a founding myth that reminded every generation of residents what was possible when people chose courage over fear, justice over convenience, and love over bitterness. The boarding house where it all began was eventually turned into a museum, preserved exactly as it had been when Helena and Cole lived there with their growing family. Visitors could see the porch where Helena had been sweeping that fateful morning, the kitchen where they had planned their strategy, the bedroom where their children had been born. They could stand in the same spots where two remarkable people had fallen in love and changed the course of history for an entire community. On the museum's dedication day, Harry Irving, now an old man himself with grandchildren of his own, stood before the assembled crowd and told the story one more time. He spoke of his mother's strength and his father's courage, of how they had refused to accept injustice, of how their partnership had shown an entire town what was possible when good people stood together. "They would want me to tell you," Harry said, his voice carrying across the crowd, "that they were not heroes. They were just two ordinary people who chose to do the right thing, even when it was dangerous and difficult. They would want you to know that each of you has that same choice every day. To stand up or stay silent, to fight for what is right or accept what is wrong, to love or to hate." He paused, looking out over the faces before him, seeing the descendants of miners and merchants, of families his parents had helped and loved. "My mother used to say that my father gave her back her inheritance, but what she really meant was that he gave her back herself, her courage, her hope, her belief in what was possible. And what my father gave my mother, she gave back to him 100-fold, and together they gave it to all of us. That is their real legacy, not the town or the businesses or the money, but the example they set of what two people can accomplish when they love each other and refuse to give up." The crowd applauded, and as Harry stepped down from the podium, he thought he felt his parents' presence, warm and approving. The story of Helena and Cole would live on, he knew, passed down through generations as both history and inspiration. It was a love story, yes, but it was also a story about justice and courage, about community and family, about the indomitable human spirit that could overcome any obstacle. And it all started with a simple moment, a woman sweeping a porch and speaking a truth aloud, not knowing that a cowboy was listening, not knowing that her whole life was about to change. It was a reminder that we never know which moment will be the turning point, which person will change everything, which act of courage will set transformation in motion. In the end, Helena and Cole's story was proof that even in the hardest times, in the most difficult circumstances, love could bloom and justice could prevail. It was proof that we are never as powerless as we think, never as alone as we feel. It was proof that sometimes, when we least expect it, help arrives in the form of a stranger with questions and a willingness to fight alongside us. And it was proof, most of all, that the things we lose can be reclaimed, that wounds can heal, that broken things can be made whole again. All it takes is courage to try, faith to believe, and love to sustain us through the struggle. Helena and Cole had all three in abundance, and they used them to build a legacy that would endure long after their deaths. A legacy written not just in deeds and documents, but in the lives they touched and the love they shared. Their story ended, as all stories must, but the truth they embodied lived on in Terlingua, Texas, a small desert town that became a symbol of hope and possibility for anyone who had ever lost something precious and dared to dream of taking it back. The sweeping woman and the cowboy who helped her became legends, but they were legends rooted in truth, in real people who lived real lives filled with real love. And that, perhaps, was the most remarkable thing of all.